Hey everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the IEP with Dr. D. Today, our topic is what is an IEP and what the law actually requires. I want to walk you through the required parts of an IEP, not just best practices, not just recommendations, but what the law actually says must be included. This is great for parents, educators, and advocates who want clarity, not confusion. And in today's video, I'll do a cursory overview of each section, but I hope you'll subscribe to my channel because further videos we will delve in deep into each of the different areas that are required. Hi, I'm Dr. D. I'm a veteran educator in special education, general education. I've served as an educational diagnostician, a special ed director, and a professor of special education. I've spent 38 years working with in-service teachers and pre-service teachers and parents. So today, what is an IEP? Well, an IEP stands for an Individualized Education Plan. It is a legally binding document. Once an IEP has been written and agreed upon by the schools and the parents, it's required by law. You have to follow it. An IEP explains how a student with a disability will receive a free and appropriate public education, which we also call FAPE. This is not optional. This is a legal obligation that must be followed. So what law governs what we do in special education, especially governs the IEP? IEPs are required under federal law. Things that IDEA guarantees. Number one, access to education. A student attending a public school is guaranteed access. Prior to 1975, students who came to school with a disability, the school could turn them away. That's no longer the case. It also provides individualized supports. So that could be things such as accommodations or related services. It also mandates education in the least restrictive environment. Now, the least restrictive environment really depends on the student. It is not always the general education classroom, but we always start with the general education classroom as our starting point. It also guarantees parental participation. Our parents are very involved in the IEP process and from drafting goals and working with us on present levels of performance. It also has procedural protections in place so that students receive procedural protections. Everything in that IEP must align with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So let's talk about what are the different sections of an IEP. Well, the first section is the present levels of academic and functional performance. This section answers one very critical question. Where is the student right now? So those present levels must include things such as academic performance. That could be grades, quiz grades, test grades, grades on the report card. It could be formal assessment, informal assessment. That gives us a well-rounded picture of the student. The next area is functional performance. For some of our students who may have significant disabilities, we might need to focus on functional performance, and that could be things such as toileting, it could be communication skills. We also have to make sure we talk about how the disability impacts learning. How does this child's disability impact their learning in school? We also have to make sure that we are using current and relevant data, which means it's so important to do progress monitoring and know where each of our students are in their IEP. This is the foundation of every IEP. The present levels of academic achievement and functional performance is the foundation. I like to think of it this way. When someone builds a home, they're building a home, hopefully they think, on a solid foundation. But let's say for some reason that foundation was not solid and it started cracking and it started shifting and the house started shifting with it. That's what we don't want. We also want to make sure that that's not the case with our IEP. If those present levels of performance are vague, or they're outdated, or they're not data-based, then that IEP is legally weak from the very start. Another part of our IEP are the measurable annual goals. And you heard me say measurable. That's very important. They have to be measurable goals. Those goals must be, first of all, based on the present levels of performance that we just talked about. They have to be tied to that student's disability-related needs. What are the needs of the student? So an IEP cannot be a cookie-cutter approach, and we say that all students with learning disability receive this. That's not the case. We need to know what skills the student is going to be working on. Are they going to be working on reader comprehension, math calculation? Are they going to be working on their ability to sustain attention for a certain period of time? And we need to know under what conditions this measurable goal will be written. What conditions are we putting into place? Are we saying we're going to be giving them a Venn diagram to use? Are we going to allow them to use a chart of multiplication facts? Also, how are we going to measure the progress? What is the measurement of progress that will be used that we can use to measure the goal? What level of mastery is expected for this student? Most of the time, it's the mastery level that's for any student, which is usually 70%. The thing to remember is if a goal cannot be measured, it does not meet the legal standard. Your goal has to be measurable. I have to be able to take the information, look at it, and say, yes, using this goal, I can measure what it is the student is supposed to be able to do. Another area that we have to make sure we include is special education services. Special education is a service. It is not a place. So what services might we be offering? The IEP must be very clear in describing those services. Those services might mean things such as what services the student will be receiving, how often those services will be provided, how long will each of those sessions last, where will those services occur? Is that going to be in the general education classroom? Is it going to be in the speech therapy room? Is it going to be in a resource classroom? The law requires specificity in making sure we talk about each area of special education services. Those phrases that we've all seen on IEP, such as needed or when appropriate, those aren't legally defensible. Don't use those in an IEP. The services have to be clear, they have to be concrete, and they have to be implementable. The next area that we consider in an IEP are related services. Not all students will need related services, but if a student needs additional support to benefit from special education, then that IEP must include those related services. Those could be things such as speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, transportation, counseling. Those related services must also include the frequency, how often that will be happening, the duration of that service, and the location of that service. If data shows that a student needs a related service, then the school cannot just simply choose not to provide it. It must be provided. Another very important part of the IEP are the accommodations and modifications. That IEP must list, when appropriate accommodations and modifications. Accommodations help students access learning. They don't change any expectations. So some examples that would allow a student to access learning would be extended time, preferential seating, the use of a calculator, a spelling list, a word bank, visual supports. Modifications are totally different because they change what the student is expected to learn. So maybe it's reducing the mastery level. All those supports have to be based on a need that the student has. It has to be a documented need, and it has to occur consistently across different settings. Please make sure that you understand that accommodations are totally about access. They have nothing to do with advantage. Participation in the general education is another very valuable part of our IEP because it must explain how that student will participate in general education. So the IEP must talk about time spent in a general education setting. If a student is going to be removed from that general education setting, then the explanation has to be very clear as to why that student is being removed from that general education setting. Is it because the IEP cannot be implemented there? Is it because it's a service that has to be with a related service person, such as a physical therapist or things of that nature? So students are only removed from general education if they cannot achieve satisfactorily in that setting with supports. This goes hand in hand with that when we talk about least restrictive environment, which is the next area that we want to talk about on the IEP. Closely tied to that placement is the principle of LRE, least restrictive environment. LRE means students should learn with their non-disabled peers as much as possible. So anytime we're making placement decisions and we're considering least restrictive environment, it has to be individualized based on that student, not their label. It has to be based on data, so that means we have to have current data showing why that student may not need to be in this setting and they must be in this setting. It never is to be based on a label. The goal always is access, inclusion, and of course support. Another very important area that we have to address is state and district assessments. The IEP must state how that student will participate in state and district assessments. So this includes whether the student takes that standard assessment. If they do, what accommodations will be used? Or if not applicable, why would an alternative assessment be required? And all of those assessment decisions must be individualized and documented clearly in the IEP. Another thing that has to be very clear in our IEP is progress monitoring and reporting. Every IEP must explain how progress will be measured. That means we need to talk about what data we're going to collect. How often will that progress be reviewed? When will our parents receive updates of the progress monitoring? How is the team determining whether that IEP is effective? Using progress monitoring data. Because without progress monitoring data, there's no accountability. And accountability has to be in place so that we can make sure that our students are achieving the goals that have been written for them. Another area that was very important is parental participation and procedural safeguards. Our parents have rights throughout the entire IEP process. This includes their rights to participate in meetings, to review any educational records, to receive prior written notice to any changes in a student's IEP or before an IEP meeting. Also, it provides them access to dispute resolution options. So schools must provide safeguards and explain them clearly. We can't expect that all of our parents will understand the terminology listed, so we need to explain it to them. Parent participation is a legal requirement. It is not a courtesy. So the final takeaway that I hope you take away today is, here's the bottom line. An IEP is not just a plan. It is a legal promise. When all of those required components come together and are presented and written clearly, that student receives meaningful support. When we have components that are missing or they're extremely vague, then that student can lose services and the school can lose legal protection. So understanding what the law actually requires empowers teams to do better for students. And I always like to say at the end of my videos, special education is not paperwork. It is people and procedures. I hope you will join me for future videos where we look very carefully at each of those areas that we talked about today. Now, I hope you stuck around because I have a freebie for you. Below, if you will click on the link, I have a IEP checklist that you can use as you're going through your IEPs. It has been aligned with the federal law. So you have a checklist that you can put down beside your IEP as you're doing and check off to make sure that you have clearly outlined every area in that IEP. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you in our next video.